Hello, and welcome to That Tech Show, the show that reveals the magicians behind the magic that is everyday technology. Today, we have Erica Stanford on the show, and, well, Chris, who is Erica Stanford?
Erica Stanford is the founder of the one and only Crypto Currier Club, the UK's most recommended crypto networking and events organisation, all powered with a common interest and love for the British national dish. But Erica doesn't just stop there. She's the publisher of both the weekly Crypto Currier industry newsletter and the Blockchain Industry Review. She's the advisor to several crypto startups, a guest lecturer at Warwick Business School, and she's the author of CryptoWars, Faked Deaths, Missing Billions and Industry Disruption, which has been described as an accessible guide to the confusing and fast-growing world of crypto scams. So get ready for some great crypto stories and scams coming up.
Hello, my name is Erica Stanford. I'm the founder and run the Crypto Currier Club, so that's the main crypto community in the UK. And last year wrote the book CryptoWars, Faked Deaths, Missing Billions and Industry Disruptions, all about the biggest hacks and scams in the crypto space.
So plenty of stuff for us to get into today then. So where should we start first? The Currier Club probably came first, so why don't we start there?
Yeah, so the Crypto Currier Club, it was, until lockdown, a lot of fun. I started that because I wanted to meet other people in the crypto space and find out more what was going on. And other events, there were some that were good, but were very technical and very dry, but were quite hard to meet people. And other events were just basically sales pitches for scams. But at all of the other events, even the good ones, you tended to be sat in rows listening to a speaker. And at the end, they'd say, well, go network, and relatively outgoing. But if I'm told to go up to complete strangers in a room and talk to people I don't know, that was not within my comfort zone or something I found even remotely easy. So I was sort of one of the multiple awkward people standing, that at the side of it, maybe talking to the one person there that I knew, or sort of, trying to look busy getting a drink or something. So I started the curries I'd been to. It was someone else's event for a different industry, but that was over a Christmas curry. So curry being the national British food, and Christmas curry being a traditionally good way to get together with people. And I just, it was such a good event because you're sat around these big tables sharing lots of food and drink, and it was all very nice and very easy to meet and talk to people. And it really is easy when you're sat opposite people sharing a load of food together. So I thought, well, that's exactly what's needed in this space. And curry being the only acceptable food in Britain to share, I suppose, and Crypto Currier being a good name. So we started it and it grew.
Yeah, it is a great name. I mean, I think I've come across some curry clubs in the past before. I think it is a thing, but never a crypto one. I think that's a great idea.
I think it's the only Crypto Currier club going. I hope it's the only Crypto Currier club going.
Well, it's the only one called the Crypto Currier Club, I suppose.
It is, yeah.
So when did you start that then?
That was in 2018.
And how big? Well, until lockdown, because things changed then. Yes. How big did you manage to grow it? How much interest did you have in it?
Well, it was remarkable that the first one, it was really, I just invited the few people I'd already met in the space, and then went through LinkedIn and invited a few other people that I thought looked really interesting, and just rented out an Indian restaurant, which was owned by a friend of a friend. And we had a space, and 25 people came and ended up staying for about 8 hours. It started at 1 PM, and I left about 9, and there were still people there sort of talking and drinking. I think people had gone onto the bar opposite afterwards. But it actually was really good. And I think for the first time, people felt that they were in a sort of a community space with where it was easy to talk to other people who understood the same thing and were working in the same space, and with lots of food and drink. So the second one and the ones thereafter just sold out really quickly. One of them I just sent an email out to a few people that had come, and a few others who'd asked to be told about them, and it sold out within about an hour.
Wow.
Then we quite soon had some of the big corporates coming, the big search engines, the universities, the banks, and then founders of the startups and so forth coming. And there was one of them a couple of months in, we had someone from Nike and Google and Facebook there, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then one soon after, someone from the UN came, and I was like, this is crazy. And wow. it just grew. So by lockdown, I think we had over about 1,000 people who just from the London area, and we had a couple others in the other tech hubs in the UK around London. So by lockdown, we had I think just over 1,000 people who'd asked to sort of be subscribed to be told about the next events. And I used to do that on a sort of quite invite-only basis so that we could make sure that everyone coming to the events was sort of the right type of person, so relevant to the industry, working in the right space, wasn't involved in a scam or anything like that, because that was still a problem. And since lockdown, that's gone up about 4x, which has been remarkable.
So it's increased during lockdown? It's
increased a lot.
Wow. So how did you make that transition then into lockdown? Then is it now a virtual curriculum?
Well, I mean, sadly not. We haven't quite managed to ship the curries for everyone. We did a virtual chocolate tasting experience where a chocolate company shipped real chocolates to everybody and gave a virtual talk, which was a lot of fun during lockdown. But no, we've did over about 50 webinars and sort of panels and live chats with the community. We launched an industry publication, Blockchain Industry Review, so that goes out every month. It's sort of deeper dive features and interviews with people in the space. We had the newsletter that we started just I think a few months before lockdown, the Crypto Currier, and nice. That growth. So I think it was just a combination of, we did a few quizzes at the start of lockdown. This was at a time when we all thought, it's just a few weeks of being at home and then we'll go back to London and see people again. And I think a combination of the virtual events, some of those have had really, really good attendee numbers, and hundreds of attendees from all around the world, in some cases joining those in the publication, and I think just various sort of words of praise and sharing things online has led people pretty much organically to it.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? With the lockdown stuff and the virtual stuff, it allows you to make things a little more international. So is that something do you envisage that continuing, like a more of an international involvement in the Curry Club? Is it going to be exported? Are you exporting the national dish?
Well, that has been really nice, and that's been one of the blessings of lockdown, because we used to have speakers at events, for example, and we had the occasional person. We had some people fly in from Silicon Valley and from the States and from Europe to the events or to speak at the events, but mostly it was a very much a British or UK thing, and then suddenly by going virtual, we could pretty much have anybody in the world to speak. So we've had some remarkable people speaking from Canada, from the States, from all over the world. And, that we could get them to speak because they're interesting and relevant and topical. And it didn't really matter where they were based or, the fact that they were also locked down in wherever it was at the time. So that has been great, and that has really opened it up. As for international events, I mean, let's see, we haven't even been able to go back to having anything in London or the UK yet. It sort of started, hopefully, hoping that this last month we'd be able to get people back together in person. And again, we had 2 tiny little events, just a small group in a place outside when that opened up again. And we were meant to have one on Thursday, and I've just cancelled it because the corona rates are so high at the moment. It just seems frankly reckless to get people together.
Yeah, the government have the opposite opinion, of course, at the minute. But
yes, but.
But yes, no, that makes total sense. So in terms of starting the Curry Club, did you have a prior experience in organising events? I mean, where did the idea come from?
Zero experience, to answer that question, honestly. The idea literally came from, I'd been to this other curry club. It was this sort of property investors Christmas curry thing, and it was just so good, really, really friendly, really easy to get to know people. I thought that's exactly what's needed for the space. And I mean, as you say, there are a number of curry clubs across the UK, and it's a sort of a popular-ish idea. I didn't think it would get quite so big. All I really thought it was going to be initially, I thought Crypto Curry Club, that's a good name. That's a bit of fun. And there wasn't anything else like that. There wasn't really a community. There was no way that was easy for people to get together. So I really initially thought, we'll just do it once a month, one afternoon a month, get people together, get over some food, some drink, and just get to know people like that way and see them again the next month and so forth. So that was the initial plan. And for the first, 6 months or a year, that's literally all it was. We just got together once a month, a group of people. to chat about relevant things in the space. And then it got too big for that. So we had one about crypto, one about blockchain, and then it sort of expanded from there, where we got to have a bigger community and have more and more niche themed events and more niche themed speakers.
And when did your interest in crypto come from?
So a friend, I heard about crypto first in 2017. A friend told me about it and sort of thought I'd be interested. So I started having a look into it. Where my interest came from, I'd lived in Buenos Aires during sort of what was the economic crash time there. It was a year abroad from my uni degree, where I was meant to be, I think, in theory, learning Spanish, and had rather a bit more fun sort of traveling around Argentina, but anyhow, but you know, I was spending time in Buenos Aires, and it's this absolutely incredible city, and made friends with some locals, and then had a whole community of friends there. And the first sort of lesson that you were taught from people that you became friends with and what you saw, nobody kept money in banks. The first thing they did when they got paid their salaries in pesos, was to cash out the pesos and convert them into physical euros and dollars, and keep those physical notes in safes in their houses. And this was at a time where the whole sort of economy had been disrupted there. There was inflation, there was a lot of uncertainty. Labor was, you know, effectively seen as being, you know, worthless. So the whole economy had been disrupted. And the sort of working classes, there were so many people that had become homeless, middle class had become poor, the upper classes, the whole class system had changed, and the whole economy had changed there. So everybody was very nervous, everybody was disrupted. There were lots of protests. I mean, constantly on the streets in Buenos Aires at the time, there were people protesting and banging pots and pans, and then sort of, you know, people were really worried. People just didn't trust the bank. So that had stuck with me. And I used to spend summers during uni going over to South America and traveling around. And one of those, I think it was the summer before I was in Buenos Aires, I'd been in Guatemala, just traveling around alone and, you know, going totally off the beaten path. I was a little blonde, I don't know, whatever I was, 17, 18-year-old girl, and got mugged like 4 times in a row, to the point that, you know, I'd gone out with a few credit cards and traveler's checks and whatever you had, that whatever, you know, I'd set off with, and all of those had been one after the other stolen from me. So I was at a point, I was in some remote village there with zero money and zero means to be able to get money anymore, because they'd all been stolen. So the only way to get money without a bank card there was Western Union, a remittance company. So I sort of had to walk several miles to this Western Union office and called my dad, and, you know, my dad very kindly went into town in England the next day and transferred me money. And, you know, that had stuck with me, because they charged 14%, which is high. If you get sent 100 quid, 86 quid arrive, so that's demonstrably less. And it took 3 days to arrive, so I had to, you know, walk back from the Western Union, and then 3 days later walk back there again, you know, and then you got cash. And, you know, this was after I'd been mugged so often that the last thing you want to do is be stuck with a load of cash, and you know, have to do that repeatedly. And, you know, it was one of those things, you know, it was a summer, I was young, it was inconvenient, but I was going to go back to uni, and you know, no big drama. But that had really stuck with me, because that was literally the only way to get money there if you don't have a bank account. And, you know, I'd done some sort of looking up into it and reading up into it and geeked out a bit. And you've got a third of the world's population that don't have access to banking, that don't have access to cards, that literally have to rely on these remittance companies. And they're absolutely barbaric companies. They literally do whatever they can to extort the maximum amount of money out of the poorest people in the world, because they know those people have absolutely no choice. They know they can't get banking. They know if they want to receive money from friends, or if they want to send money home to family or whatever, that they have to rely on these remittance companies. So in Western Union charged 14%, but some of them charge 30%. The average around the world is 7%, which is, it's a huge amount of money. And this is people who really don't earn a lot. And, you know, in some cases, there's these stories where people literally have to choose, you know, if their kids or whatever eat that day, due to 7% of all of their money or more just going on these remittance fees. So that had really sort of stuck with me. So when I heard about crypto, you read about it, you sort of send a few microtransactions, and it arrives instantly, and you can send it for almost free. And it's not that it was easy to use then, but it was certainly a lot easier than going to a Western Union office and doing that. So I could just see that how much potential there was for this, and you can just send these transactions, they arrive instantly. And this was over 10 years ago. If you wanted to send money abroad, you had to go to a bank and you had to do it, and you had to pay 25 quid, and it took days to arrive, and you had all these high forex charges, and there's no need for the banks to charge you that, but that's just what they did charge you because they could. And suddenly with crypto, you could just send money instantly. So I was just fascinated by the space and just started reading more and wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah, it feels quite archaic, really, doesn't it, when you go back to that story, really, of over 10 years ago and what it was like to, because it was even like that for transferring money. But this is before faster payments, I suppose, as well in the UK, where you'd actually be able to make a payment in, a matter of moments. I mean,
and that's the thing with crypto, it's easy for us, if you're in London, you can just tap something with an iPhone or with a card or whatever now, and it's all quite easy, but that's not the reality for a lot of people around the world. And I think people get excited with the whole trading side of crypto and the volatility and all of that, but actually you've got this whole technology that means just by being able to send money for free and instantly and to anyone, and without having to rely on sort of corrupt or other third parties and so forth, it just opens up this world of possibilities for remittances, for the gig economy, for micropayments, for microloans, for microinsurance, for paying for content, for tipping people. There's so much potential with it.
So with your background, then you talked about what you were doing at uni, studying languages. What happened in between that university course and the deciding to set up the Crypto Currier Club? Did you have a technology background in the midst of that or not?
No, not at all. No, I got a job in sales in the city in London, and sort of worked in sort of sales and marketing strategy for a few different tech companies. So no, I'm not remotely technical, and continue to not be remotely technical at all. And it's not the tech that I'm interested in. I think that's what's so fascinating about the space for me. My technical ability, I can just about master using my iPhone. So I exaggerated a little bit, but no, not at all. I think what is interesting for me is how there's so many really super cool use cases for it. And the other thing that's really nice about the space is by running the Crypto Currier Club, you get to meet so many amazing people, just incredible people that are working in the space because they want to, because they find it exciting, because it's so fast moving, because innovation is going so fast. So you meet people constantly who are ex-defense, ex-C-suite of global corporates, ex-founders of the biggest companies in the world, the most incredible people, large investors, billionaires, whatever, students, the sort of the whole range of people who want to be in the space and are choosing to work in space, not because it makes them the most money or anything, just because they're so excited by it, and it's so fast moving, and it's just an incredible space of so many interesting people working in it.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really good point with the application of it in terms of how it could be used and how it will be used, I suppose, over the next 10 years. I'm wondering whether was there a learning curve for you when you started getting into crypto? Because there certainly was for me, but I wonder if that's just because of how deep I decided to go with it in terms of understanding blockchain, etc.
Oh, constantly. I mean, I think that's part of my nature. I sort of tend to sort of geek out and deep dive a little bit. So yeah, absolutely. I read everything I could get my hands on. I was just all over Google, read books. I sort of absorbed myself to get my head around it. And it's still constantly, people, get asked sometimes now, do you sort of understand it, or how do you keep up with it? It's like, well, it's just impossible. It's utterly impossible, I think, to keep up with how much is happening, because there's so much that's constantly happening, and it's all changing so fast. I think you'd need 1,000 people to be able to keep on top of everything. So yeah, absolutely, massively constant, steep learning curve. And, when I'm really sort of surrounded by it, you just constantly feel overwhelmed by how much there is and how much I don't know and how fast things are changing.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
No, I'm constantly intimidated by it all, to be honest.
Well, you mentioned as well, part of the reason for starting the Curry Club was also to weed out the scams as well. So I'm curious about the scam side of things and why why do you think that plays such a big part in crypto? Are there that many scams out there?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I started the Currys, what I was really conscious about was, because this was sort of after and at the tail end of the whole sort of ICO bubble period. So I was really conscious of that most other events you went to, that there was at least one person trying to promote some sort of really, really dubious investment scheme, or, trying to promote something that, was let's be diplomatic, at the very best on the grey side of sort of ethically good and legal. So I was really conscious of that. I wanted to keep the sort of the Currys, professional and good and scam and promotion free. So, initially we had to be really, really careful to check people, just because there were so many people trying to promote these dodgy projects all over the space. And it's now been determined, I think it was by the SEC in America, that of all of the ICOs, of all of the sort of the crypto projects that launched from around the 2016 2018 period, 98% now were either scams or have lost their investors all of their money. And, for as far as investors are concerned, if it was a scam or if it was just an awful project that failed miserably due to the founders or due to the project or the idea or the market or whatever it was, for the investors, it's the same. It's the same end. They still lose all of their money. So there's an enormous amount of projects that, some were downright scams. Some have been sort of Ponzi schemes and trying to scam people as the get-go from the start, and that was their sole aim. And some have done remarkably well at that and scammed tens of billions of dollars out of people. And many others, I would argue, probably didn't set out to be scams. They maybe started off as slightly naive and slightly optimistic, and then it was people getting caught up in the whole hype and the whole excitement of all of this crypto space, and not really maybe understanding it, just thinking this is this new digital money and everyone's going to get rich quick. And if we say it's better than Bitcoin and we make certain promises and we pay a freelancer to, make us a nice new website and a nice white paper and sell this cryptocurrency, we'll make lots of money. So I think there was a lot of that. And I think that was just slightly before there was no regulation at the time. And I think many people weren't probably aware that there might be regulation coming in and that there might be consequences for launching these projects, most of which have now failed. So there's been an enormous amount of scams in this space. And, some really, really bad scams, some really very clever scams that are run and orchestrated by organized crime, where they've literally got billions of dollars for marketing budgets and to promote them and to run them and to grow them, and then they go from scam to scam. So there's some that are very large and very sophisticated that just reel in millions of people.
So how do you identify them then? How do you know which is just a bad business versus something that has organized crime behind it potentially?
Oh, it's getting harder and harder. So there were some in the earlier days of crypto where the scams were, at least to the people who wanted to see it, where many of them were quite clearly Ponzi schemes and were quite clearly making claims that weren't possible. And some of the worst scams will make these claims and promises. Well, if you invest in this, we'll mine Bitcoin for you. And we've got these incredible mining rigs. So we'll mine Bitcoin for you and we'll get you back double, or we'll get you back X%. Or we've got this Bitcoin doubler. So send us your Bitcoin, we'll send you back double within 24 hours. Or we've got this, this trading algorithm, or we've got this trading bot, which just trades Bitcoin. So send us your Bitcoin, send us your money, we'll trade it, and within X amount of time, we'll send you back double, or we'll send you back 1% a day, or whatever it is. And they made all of these claims. And, the hard thing was they made all of these claims. And, traditionally you'd say, well, if any claim is made or promised or guaranteed, run for the hills, because it's impossible to do that. It's illegal to do that. just being practical, that the best sort of banks and funds and in the world that have infinite money to hire the best traders and use the best bots and software and algorithms and everything, they can't guarantee those returns. So how can a sort of a small unknown crypto startup?
Mm-hmm.
So if one were to apply sort of a few sort of sensible questions, one could perhaps at least question how real or possible or sustainable it was. But they made all of these claims, but the problem was, for every claim made, they made these claims really sort of trying to appeal to vulnerable people and trying to appeal to the whole, you'll get rich quick if you just send us our money thing. But all of those returns had already been made in crypto, legitimately, in Bitcoin and in the earlier cryptocurrencies. It had already gone up by those amounts. So it was much easier for them to make those claims because people were already aware of those figures, of those statistics. And, now it's much harder because the scams are getting really good. They're getting really sophisticated. So the websites are good. They look professionally done, and they really have no qualms in what they say. So they'll make up these claims to say, well, we're regulated by so and so. We're in partnership with so and so. We've got Visa cards or MasterCards that we can issue and give out. We're trusted by so-and-so. We've got so-and-so on our team. Look at our amazing reviews. We've got reviews by so-and-so, so-and-so. And, with the scams, they're often fake. They'll literally make up all of those claims. So for people looking on that aren't naturally cynical or aren't expecting to be scammed, the websites look very good. And now you've got the whole technology where they can impersonate email addresses and impersonate websites and impersonate celebrities' social media profiles. So you've got the whole thing where, yes, some celebrities and influencers have been promoting scams, and other times they're hacked or their websites or their social medias are impersonated so well that unless you really are looking for a scam, it could be very hard to see if it's a scam or not.
Yeah, you're not going to find it, I guess.
I think you have to be very, very skeptical to spot the scams. And, for an ordinary person looking on, if you're not expecting to be scammed, I think people are naturally more trusting.
And do you think, I mean, it's quite prolific, to your point, that there's a lot of scams out there. Is that because people are having success with them?
I think that's part of it. Because the scams are doing well, and it hasn't been regulated, and regulators aren't able to catch up with them for various means because it's such a new technology, because the technology is evolving so fast, because the scams are so good. Practically also recently, coronavirus hasn't helped. A lot of resources have been waylaid for that. In the UK, we've had the disaster that is Brexit, so loads more resources have gone to that. So regulators and law enforcement, I think, probably aren't as equipped as might be ideal to target the scams, and the scams, because they bring in so much money. I mean, you're talking billions of dollars in some cases, that they can move on and just pay people to take the blame. So I think certainly there have been scams where some people have been arrested, and the ringleaders, I'm sure, are still running free, unknown, and sort of masterminding and orchestrating the scams totally remotely. So there's a lot of knowledge being passed on this, on from scam to scam, and a lot of sort of accumulated experience and also money to back them, and the softwares and technology that they're using is getting so much better. So I think that's part of it. And then, I mean, also the other factor is you're talking about digital money. And, when you've got this digital currency that isn't regulated and that has in some cases really gone up in value, people see that and people want to get in for themselves. And people want to sort of get rich quick and just be able to have it easy, that if you just invest a bit, then you'll make 10x your money really quickly, or whatever it is. So people really desperately want to believe that. And especially now with the economy in tatters in many places due to the lockdown and due to the coronavirus and various factors, people are probably more vulnerable than ever. And the things, people really want to believe the claims. So I think it's a combination of the scammers know exactly how to target people, how to prey on people. And then people, also really, really wanting to believe it and seeing all of these, the early sort of rich is made by the early Bitcoin investors and so forth, and wanting their own share of that. And then plus the scammers are getting good. And for every scam that's run by, one or two guys from an office, wherever that is, there's another one that is run by really professional criminals who have the budgets and know exactly what they're doing.
Concerning that they're getting more sophisticated as well, I guess, because obviously that's going to proliferate and be even more difficult to track. I'm wondering, in terms of the range of scams that are out there as well, does that range from the actual currencies themselves all the way up to like, the doublers, we'll give you this return on investment? Because I presume that there's probably very little actual crypto behind some of these, but some of them probably do actually have something, I presume.
I think that you've touched almost exactly on a key part of the problem. That the problem isn't the technology of sort of the crypto itself. I think the main problem in this space is sort of the ecosystem around it. So, for example, yes, like you say, that the Bitcoin doublers, you've got these crypto exchanges where people store crypto and use to sort of buy and trade crypto. Now, everyone's heard the stories in crypto of the people that got in early and had Bitcoin, from early on, that they'd stored on their computer or stored on it's called sort of hard storage. It's like a little USB stick.
Yeah, I've got a little cold storage wallet knocking around here somewhere.
Right, and people had those, but the thing with those, once your crypto is on those, it's secure, it can't be hacked. But the problem is you're responsible for your private keys, like the sort of the password to access it. And there were lots of stories of people who'd got Bitcoin early and kept it on their computer or kept it on one of the sort of the cold storage devices. And, either because it had just been so long or they'd forgotten about it, or because Bitcoin really initially wasn't worth very much, and then suddenly Bitcoin went up in value, and then they realized, well, hey, I've thrown away that computer, or I've lost that device, or I've lost the sort of private keys to that device.
There's that one guy, isn't there? I think he's in Wales, isn't he? And he keeps petitioning the council to be able to go into the landfill and try and dig up his computer.
Yeah, and I mean, his crypto on that site is worth, or would be worth, I think it's 250 million or so forth, and he's offered the local council, I think it's Newport, a quarter of that for the right to dig it up and sort of get involved and if he finds it. And of course there's no guarantee, of course, that he would be able to find it after so long. You're talking about a tiny device in a massive landfill site that's been there.
That's true mining now, actually, isn't it? He would actually literally have to mine it.
With his hands, most likely, with a team of people's hands. But there's so many stories like that. And there's so many, Bitcoins that are sort of effectively lost, down the back of the sofa, that have been lost in these manners that people can't get back. So everyone's heard all of these horror stories. And then they don't want to be responsible for sort of trusting themselves to look after their own private keys. So you've got all of these crypto exchanges that make all these claims like, hey, we'll just look after your Bitcoin for you. Just send us your Bitcoin. We'll keep it safely for you. We'll store it for you. You don't have to worry about your private keys. We'll do all of that for you. Now, there's crypto exchanges and crypto exchanges. There's some crypto exchanges that, comply with regulators, that do safety checks, that have insurance, that, do whatever they can to sort of make themselves, relatively as safe as can be, that have good intentions. And there's other crypto exchanges where the sole purpose of starting them from the founder seems to be to con as many people as possible into sending their crypto into these exchanges, and then they exit scam. So there's been a few cases of those recently. There was one in Turkey recently, I think it was called Todex or Tardex or something like that, and the founder exit scammed with $2.2 billion worth of its users' crypto. There was one which is covered in the book, Quadriga. It was at the time the biggest Canadian crypto exchange, and everyone believed him and trusted it because it was the local exchange. It was meant to be so good, and that's been now found to have been a scam from the start, and it was operating almost like a Ponzi scheme.
And so do these people get away with these things at the moment because it feels, well, I mean, the way you're describing it certainly feels a little bit like the Wild West, but are people getting away with this stuff?
A lot are. So yes and no. Law enforcement and regulators are getting onto it and are doing what they can to track these people down. So with many of the worst scams, there are a lot of people now in prison, either being tried or now already in prison. So, law enforcement are getting onto them and really are sort of going back and doing what they can. And a lot of people are now being charged with them. But then the problem is, specifically with some of the sort of the bigger, especially some of the Asian scams, it seems, there's been a lot of people who have been caught, but it seems that the people that have been caught are not the masterminds. They're sort of the people that have been almost, I don't know if used is the right term, but they've been sort of the front men, that they've been the faces, they've been, what the world would see as the ones running it. But it's believed that the real masterminds behind it, sort of the real organized guys behind it, it's believed that they're still running free. And it seems with some of them that people don't really have an idea who's really behind them. Wow. So yes, people are now getting caught, at least for the worst ones. And I think that will continue. But the problem is, it's that they're so big and they're so large to investigate, and there's so many people involved in them. I think inevitably that will continue to be the case, that the real sort of masterminds behind them are probably so removed and, probably know exactly what they're doing, that they are getting away with it.
Wow. Are they actually getting decent sentences as well when they are getting caught? Or is that still an area of law that hasn't been fully fledged out yet?
So they are. I think largely because, the big ones that they're going after, you're talking that there's OneCoin. They've brought in, it's now believed to be $25 billion and have affected millions of people. And you're talking about sort of huge sort of criminal organizations and, money laundering and all of these things. So there's people getting really long sentences there for those ones. And for the bigger scams, you're talking about such huge volumes of money and so many people affected that, the authorities are really have got something to go with for those.
So that actually falls under like existing money laundering scam related things. It applies even though it's digital.
And fraud and everything, because ultimately they're still conning people out of large amounts of money.
Wow. But still missing the ringleaders. So is this ever the sort of content we're going to find in the book?
So the book is a sort of hopefully a fast-paced overview of some of the biggest scams, some of the biggest hacks, some of the biggest sort of, there's some instances in crypto where I think it wasn't even so much a scam as just so much a series of misfortunate events and happenings and bad lucks, and in some cases, I think you have to feel quite sorry for the people leading them, where their intention, I don't think ever was to scam. It was the early crypto space. So it's a sort of a whirlwind tour.
Oh, so there's something unintentional.
I think that's probably the best way to put it. Where yes, people lost money, but I don't think that was necessarily the founders' intention. And then through to the ones where it literally was organized crime, masterminding these multi-billion-dollar scams, and some hacks. And then there's a bit about the sort of the ICO, the initial coin era, and the bubble that was. You've got every type of project under the sun being launched on the blockchain. That was never needed. It was just these opportunists sort of trying to launch these new projects and using sort of the initial coin offering as I think the easiest way to get money. And you're talking about projects that, had they gone to a bank or to a VC or to a professional investor, they'd probably been laughed all the way home, because there was never any purpose or business or anything behind that. So it looks not only at the scams, but also at that ICO time when it really was, sometimes individuals that had awful ideas that could never have possibly been businesses, just copying a bit of open source code and paying a freelancer a few dollars to create, copy a template website, create a, pretty bad logo, copy someone else's white paper to describe what the project, what supposedly was going to do, except it never ended up actually doing that. And then you could just pay to list the project on one of these listing sites, and, you could create your own cryptocurrency. That was quite easy and cheap to do. And call it scam coin or whatever you wanted to call it. and they still raised money. There literally was one called scam coin. There was another one called Ponzi coin. There was one called useless Ethereum token that basically told people they were going to, they were out to scam people, or that they weren't going to do anything with the money other than one of them said, we're not going to do anything. Maybe we'll buy ourselves some smart TVs.
Wow.
And people still sent in money. So it was just this total sort of bubble period where it was just a combination of hype and opportunists and scams and excitement, and the whole thing sort of bubbled up into this crazy frenzy. So it looks at sort of an overview of the craziest stories and times in the crypto space, and then at the end also touches on some of what I would consider to be the cooler use cases of crypto.
You've got interested enough in crypto in sort of 2018 enough to launch the Curry Club.
Yes.
When did you start writing the book?
Well, I got very lucky on the timing. The publisher reached out to me and just before lockdown. So I started writing it and started researching it at the start of lockdown. And that took me pretty much all through last year. So for the entirety of lockdown, we were in lockdown from March last year, March 2020. And pretty much still are effectively. So it was the ultimate lockdown project. So it was pretty much all of 2020, and I'd been, I think, lucky with the timings through the Crypto Currier Club. We've got access to incredible people, and how it had sort of worked. Wow, I'd been sent at the end of 2019. I'd been sent a link to the Missing Crypto Queen podcast series, and I'd been sent that podcast. And I'd never listened to podcasts, and I was absolutely hooked. I listened to it twice in a row, and then I emailed the host of it, Jamie Bartlett, and slightly, I suppose, cheekily, just saying, I run this Crypto Currier Club and I love your podcast. Would you be willing to speak at one of our events? And he replied that he'd love to, and I was so happy. So he came and spoke at one of our Crypto Curries just a few months before lockdown, and it was absolutely incredible. He told us the most incredible stories about investigating the scam and all of his findings. It was just absolutely incredible. And he told us some of the stuff that he couldn't probably share so openly on a podcast. And what was really good, I mean, we had that, and he's introduced me to a few other people from the show, but also from that event, because this was one of the real life in-person Crypto Currier events before lockdown. And our community is made up of what is now thousands of people who've been in the space since early days, since right at the beginning sometimes. So quite a few people came forward to me and started telling me their own stories of other crypto scams that they'd seen or that they'd witnessed, or, that they'd tried to stop or tried to warn people about. And they told me their own stories and crazy stories, real death threats and messages from sort of, organized crime and government involvement. And they told me these absolutely crazy stories that they'd, experienced just because they'd witnessed or tried to warn other people about some of the earlier scams. And then they sort of started bringing me into some of the Facebook groups and social media groups that are run by the scams. And what's so crazy, you've got these real life Facebook groups run by these scams and being sort of promoting scams, and with people literally scamming each other there in front of your eyes on these Facebook groups. And they brought me into them, and I was just sat in these groups, just watching and reading these posts, just like, I can't believe this is happening. So it all sort of worked out quite, I suppose, fortuitously that the publisher approached after I'd had this event with JB, had sort of been approached by all these people that told me all of their stories about scams. So as a result of that, I was able to speak to so many, incredible people with the most, incredible stories and their own sort of experiences of a lot of it.
So did the publisher contact you off the back of the Curry Club? Was that why they were so interested?
I'm not entirely sure. I should ask them. I think that was part of it, because we had the community, and I think they probably hoped that people in the community would buy the book, and partly because of the context to be able to speak to people about it. It certainly wasn't because of my writing ability. I think I'd been a grand total of nothing in between then and my uni dissertation, which was at the time a traumatic experience, and I don't think writing that dissertation was my forte in life. So.
Yeah, I identify with that as well, actually. Wow. I mean, so are there any? Well, there's so much stuff in that book, but are you able to give us some teasers to encourage the listeners to this podcast, to maybe buy the book?
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully people will buy the book to get a good overview of some of the crazier, worst, sort of, incredulous stories of the earlier days in crypto. So some of the stories it touches on is the Canadian Crypto Exchange, where the founder wrote her will 4 days before going to India on a honeymoon, and got married, went on honeymoon, and then died under the most mysterious circumstances. And then the stories came out that it had been a scam from the start, and that his pilot and other people had supposedly seen him carrying stacks of up to 50 grand in cash out of the country at a time. And there's now still nobody I've spoken to in the space believes he's dead. So that there was a burial, and you've still got people petitioning for his body to be exhumed to see if it was actually him, if he actually died. There's not a single person I've spoken to in the entire crypto space who believes this man is dead, and they believe he literally just did an exit scam. I mean, either way, it was a scam, and the money is lost. But it's just this crazy story.
So, what do you expect that that's sort of like a plastic surgery type?
Possibly.
What's your theory?
To me, it seems if he died, it was very unlucky and a lot of suspicious circumstances.
Sounds a little too unlucky to me.
It's possible he'd had health conditions. It's possible people die all the time. Having traveled extensively in Asia, there are also places where I imagine that one could live relatively happily, relatively cheaply, and relatively quietly, sort of almost unnoticed by the rest of the world. So who knows? And then you've got the missing crypto queen, the OneCoin scam, where Ruja, the founder, and this is covered in the BBC's podcast series also, but Ruja, the founder, had it's been declared by the FBI and by law enforcement to have been a scam since 2017, and there's people have been arrested, her brother's arrested, her lawyer's been arrested, and so forth, and they're now in US prisons. And the story there, she was married and was having an affair with her also married money launderer. And they'd hoped to sort of run away together and have kids together. And she was rather jealous, apparently, that he hadn't quite left his wife for her. So she, apparently bought the flat beneath his in Miami and hired somebody to drill a hole between the two so that she could listen in on him and his wife to see if he was going to leave his wife for her. But instead, she overheard him telling his wife that she was wanted by the FBI because in the meantime he'd become an FBI informant and sort of a plea deal. So she's been missing ever since as well. And this is a woman who's now expected to have managed to take maybe several $1 billion away with her. She already liked plastic surgery. She'd already had a lot of plastic surgery. She's highly intelligent. She speaks, I think it was 5 languages fluently. It's not impossible that she's still alive. So the expectation is a lot of people think she's still alive and is hiding out somewhere. I think my personal belief on that one is it's now known that there were collaborations with organized crime, with mafia, even with government involvement. My assumption is that she knows too much. She's going to be in prison for the rest of her life if she ever gets caught. And there's no incentive to her not to talk. So my assumption is that she'd have been bumped off because she served her purpose and is now useless and knows too much. But I have absolutely no idea. And then it just goes into some of the absolute craziest sort of crypto projects and ideas and concepts that literally you wouldn't believe would be true, or you wouldn't believe would be businesses, except they actually were.
Sounds like you could have a whole true crime podcast just on all of the on crypto.
Maybe that's what we should do.
Maybe you hear it here first.
Yeah.
No, that's
just rebrand.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? But you actually have a podcast as well, don't you? Don't you have a Curry cast?
Yes. We started doing. We did 2 whole episodes before lockdown, and promptly I bought all the microphones and everything for it and left it in the office in March last year, and only managed to get access to that again just a week or two ago. So we've been doing quite a lot of online content and webinars and so forth. So hopefully, I do very much hope that we'll one day be able to resume in-person podcasts again.
Yeah, well, it's funny, since starting this podcast, because I do have a co-host normally, Sam, who just isn't actually able to make it today, but we haven't done a single episode in person. It's all been entirely remote, which is interesting. It's nice to meet people, but it'd be great to do it in person.
It's not the same. It's not the same.
No, absolutely. It's much nicer to be able to meet people in person, I guess. You mentioned as well about some of the misfortune stuff. Have you what misfortunes can you enlighten us on?
What do you mean by misfortunes?
So you mentioned before that there was the hacks as well. There was the scams, which we've talked about. But you also mentioned about some misfortune. Well, we talked a bit about the guy who's lost his crypto in the rubbish dump. But are there any others?
There's more than a few of those of people that just lost crypto under all sorts of circumstances earlier, and or trusted it to exchanges. I think the one that I refer to in the book, that sort of there's an exchange called Mt. Gox, which was the biggest crypto exchange, the biggest Bitcoin exchange in the early days, and it had about 80% of all crypto going through it at one time. And that one I don't think started off with any intention to scam anybody at all, but the guy who sort of took it over, it had been started by somebody else who didn't want to run it anymore. It started off as an exchange for, it was called Magic the Gathering. It's a sort of a playing card game for people to trade these playing cards, rather niche. And then I think that the founder had come to the conclusion that running an exchange for this sort of niche trading site for trading these niche playing cards probably wasn't what he wanted to spend his life doing, and turned it into a Bitcoin exchange. And then this other guy took it over. And I think it's fair to say that the guy who ended up taking it over probably wasn't the ultimate best person to run what was to be the biggest crypto exchange at the time. But it is now thought that it had already been hacked, it had already been having tech problems. And what happened, because this exchange was hacked so often, it was just constantly bleeding out crypto. And the hackers were clever. They knew that if they took all of the crypto in one go, because this was early days of Bitcoin, when the liquidity just wasn't there, had they taken all of the Bitcoin in one go, they wouldn't have been able to cash it out. It would have just crashed the market. It would have been too easy to trace. So they wouldn't have been able to realize the value of it. So they realized that and just sort of leaked it out slowly, drip by drip by drip by drip. So the exchange never realized that they were having their Bitcoin stolen, because there was just always fresh Bitcoin going in, which covered up the Bitcoin going out. Now, had they, one could argue, had they checked, had they had sort of proper accounting, maybe they would have realized earlier, but anyhow, they didn't. But now it's even thought that it had been hacked before he even took it over. So it was effectively bankrupt before it even started. So, not that they're entirely innocent in the process. By no definition of the word, they could have done an awful lot more in terms of security, in terms of checks, in terms of accounting and so forth. But I think you do get the impression that you've got these early crypto projects and these early crypto exchanges where they grew so fast and people were just in totally over their heads. And in this case, I mean, the guy, I think what started off as a small sort of side project, just because of how the crypto space was, it just totally ballooned and totally exploded into this thing that was just absolutely massive and probably unmanageable, that would have taken an army of trained experts to run it. So, I don't think one can call Mt. Gox a scam. Certainly I know a lot of people personally who lost money to that, or possibly get their money back or not. They're not really holding out any hope for that. And it's still ongoing. But, I think that is also demonstrative of the early crypto space, where it was just so wild, and there was no regulation, and the user experience was horrific. And, all of these companies that really even wanted to get banked and wanted to do things properly couldn't, because no bank would take them, or the banks were messing them over and so forth. So, and nobody would do the auditing checks. So, I think it's one of those spaces where in some cases it's certainly not black and white who's to blame. And, for the guy who ended up running Mt. Gox, I think I and quite a few people feel quite sorry for him. That he was just totally in over his head and yes, made a bunch of mistakes, but the intention wasn't there to scam.
So are there any particular success stories that spring to mind?
In crypto?
Yeah. What are the ones that stick out for you that, are the real winners at this particular moment in time? The exciting projects, because we all know about Bitcoin and things like that, and that's a different discussion. But what are the other exciting projects that you think we should be keeping our eye on?
I mean, I'd probably argue that Bitcoin is the most exciting of all. The technology and the concepts behind it are incredible, and it's done so much, and it's just this master what's the term? This sort of master print for what can be done and how it could be done. It's just eye-opening, and it's it really was the first time that people can send money from person to person without needing to trust what are quite often corrupt banks and corrupt governments and companies that can just disappear with your money or charge you crazy high amounts and cause unnecessary delays. So I'd still say for me it's Bitcoin.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that Bitcoin is a bad thing. I'm curious about the other smaller coins. I mean, let's have a quick conversation about Bitcoin though, because I mean, there's been a whole load of people have been getting very excited about Bitcoin, probably in the last, 6 months, the end of 2020.
Are you referring to some of our billionaire friends? And
I was about to mention a specific. I was about to mention one specific billionaire. Yeah, absolutely.
And a tendency to like tweeting about crypto.
Yes. Actually, I mean that's another point. I mean, how does the tweeting factor in for you? I mean, is that going in the direction of is that insider trading? Are we going to have some issues down the line, or
we've got a WhatsApp group, a sort of closed chat group for the Crypto Currier Club, and I think the general consensus there is that it's blatant market manipulation. Everybody seems to agree on that, and our billionaire friend is very clever, and points made are valid. It's good to accept Bitcoin. If you're a company, it's probably good to hedge a certain percentage of your money in Bitcoin. It's also very true that Bitcoin is bad for the environment and uses a lot of energy, and that it would be better if it used sustainable energy. All of the points made are very valid, and it's hard to disagree with those. So in that sense, it's less blatant market manipulation than we've seen throughout the era of YouTubers and influencers.
But what do you think to this sort of, we're all in on Bitcoin from our billionaire friend and his subsidiary companies, to, actually now we're all out of Bitcoin, and, you can pay with Bitcoin or you can't pay with Bitcoin.
And then we'll be back in Bitcoin when it's this and the other. I find it hard to imagine that somebody clever enough to create such successful and large companies and make so much money and do so many incredible things doesn't know what they're doing.
Do you think he wants them to be all solar powered?
Possibly.
So it's a ploy for Solar City, I think. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I think Bitcoin is, it's the monster in this whole scenario, and I think all of the other coins have sort of been pegged to that for at least a very long time. But it seems like that might be starting to shift. I don't know what your interpretation is. You're closer to this than I am.
I mean, I think Bitcoin is still king and is still dominant. I think where the conversation will now go, in one argument, the sort of the stable coin concept is very good because Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are very volatile, and if you rely on that for your earnings, for your life savings, volatility isn't necessarily good. And you've got people in Venezuela and in countries all around the world that literally rely on Bitcoin as a lifeline because it's less volatile and it's far safer than their national currency, and it's often the only way they can get money out of their national currency. So I think it would be wonderful for people all around the world to have a relatively stable asset-backed digital currency that isn't manipulated, that people can rely on for international payments, for being able to save money digitally, because you've still got a third of the world's population that don't have access to banking. And the likelihood that traditional banks are going to suddenly decide in a charitable way to go out to bank the poorest people around the world, it's almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about ubiquitous crypto, I guess, so governments getting involved in crypto, they're actually being de facto currencies around the world. Is it going to be Bitcoin? Is it going to be a derivative of that? Is it going to be one of the smaller coins? Is it going to be something entirely new? What do you think it's going to be?
I mean, I think the one thing one's learned with the crypto markets that they are manipulated, and there's so many factors at stake is that one can't make any form of guess. My belief and assumption, I think / hope that Bitcoin will continue to be dominant in the crypto space. It was the first, it has first user advantage, it's safe, it's seen as a store of value. Are you going to be using Bitcoin every time you want to buy a coffee? Possibly not. But I think Bitcoin has its place and will continue to have its place. I think what we'll see is there'll be other cryptocurrencies which will come forward and be used more in sort of transactions, in payments. Maybe that's Ethereum, maybe that's another one that will come forward that will be very light, very fast, very cheap to use, very energy efficient, that they're always being developed. So, I think there will continue to be a lot of innovation in the space. I mean, at the moment, you've got about 10,000 different cryptocurrencies. I believe that probably 99% of those will, lots of those are already basically useless and not really, actively being developed anymore. But I am sure that before a few years are out, we'll see many more, and we'll also see that 99% of those won't be actively being used. I think what we'll also see is more digital currencies being used in incentive payments and loyalty rewards. And, instead of going into a coffee shop and every time you buy a coffee, you get a stamp. And then once you've got 9 stamps, you get a free coffee. I don't think we'll see many more of those paper sort of tickets and anymore where you used to get your sort of paper cards and you get your stamps, and after 10 coffees, you get a free coffee. I think there'll be more of a move towards the digital loyalty points. So, maybe brands will have their own tokens, or maybe there'll be one universal one that will come out to be used for that. I think that's an incredibly interesting space to be in and to be watching. But I do think we'll see much more on the incentive, on the rewards payments, on the sort of incentive points, or tipping you or liking someone's tweet, or every time you buy some coffee or something. I do see you've got so much talk now of the central banks and governments around the world now launching their own national digital currencies. And my assumption, I mean, just for example, in the UK, you've got talk about the sort of the digital pound, and my assumption is that will be more one to replace the pound. I.e., if you've got physical pounds, if I want to buy drugs from you, if you want to buy drugs from me, the best way to do that, the easiest way to do that is for us to meet in person and swap drugs for a £10 note or a £20 note or however much they cost these days, for cash, because that can't be traced. And with physical cash, you've got all the problems. You've got all of the, it can be faked. It can be, it's easier to use in crime because you can't trace it. So, I do think the governments will be trying to get rid of cash, A, because of the sort of the physical and the energy costs of printing it, and B, because it is so easy to fake, and they've got to do all these checks around that, and there's so and so much percentages of all sort of banknotes are faked. And then also because it is easier to use in crime. So I think we'll see national governments go more towards sort of a digital currency where they can have much more control over it. They've got much more data over it, which is great for governments and great for central banks, and probably not great for the entire rest of the population. But maybe that's just my opinion. But I think we'll see Bitcoin and some of the other cryptocurrencies running separately alongside that still.
Well, I think on the security sense, I mean, it kind of makes sense to a degree, because I think, I think it's an old statistic, but I think there was somewhere in the region of about a third of all physical pound coins were fake at one point.
I didn't know it's that bad. Wow.
It's probably not, and it's probably a statistic I'm remembering from about 15 years ago, and I've embellished it somewhat, but I certainly read it at some point. The point you're making though about the government, and I mean, I mean, our government's questionable as anyway. I mean, in other parts of the world,
you're being very polite.
Yeah, well, I've tried to check out of the news over the last 6 months because it's just too depressing. But I certainly know
you're right. We're still relatively incredibly lucky in the UK, and there are governments with less good intentions, and there are governments that are totally corrupt, and there are governments where the intention is entirely to control their citizens, and we're already seeing that around the world. And what I find scary about the sort of the concept of the national digital currency is once that enforced. I mean, we're already seeing that with the Corona legislations. Once something is there, once a technology is there, once something's been brought in and accepted by the people, it's only ever, just do this. This is the next good thing. This is the next good, and people do it and people believe it. We're already seeing that with freedoms being taken away with the Corona virus, which in many ways I have nothing against, because I'd rather be, to be honest, protected from the coronavirus, and I'd rather stay home and be safe. That's again a personal opinion, but I think my worry with those digital currencies is it will be quite easy for governments to just bring in more changes and more sort of abilities to control things and to have access to people's data and so forth. And people will have to accept that because they'll just get used to it, or they'll get told it's okay, or they won't notice it. And then there's also the fact that you are only ever one election away from something changing, or one personality away from something changing. So, even if something gets brought in with the absolute best of intentions, it's not that can't change.
I always liked the idea behind with crypto, the fact it being totally decentralized. I think it's almost quite scary to think about governments co-opting that technology because of the, as you say, you're only one election away. It's almost terrifying, I think.
Well, I think it's fair to say that sort of government national digital currencies won't be entirely decentralized.
Yeah, my concern really, I think I like the idea that we could be sort of slowly but surely be progressing towards a global credit system in a sort of dystopian future kind of way that is all entirely decentralized and has no governmental control. But that seems very far away.
Yeah, and there's place for structure and government. I'm there's many people in the crypto space that really want that, and I'm not disputing that. But we've seen it over and over again when governments get too much power, things can change. And the reality is, once you've got power over your money, if you can just block your access to your wallet or block your ability to book transport tickets, in China they're trying to make it that citizens, if they're in that sort of wrong social sector, that if there's people that they want to be able to basically not leave their apartments, not be able to do anything, that's the aim. And I find that really scary.
No, it's terrifying, and a possible future, I think.
Not impossible by any definition of the word. It's very Black Mirror, but it's yeah. It's already happening.
Speaking of which, in terms of like the future, we've talked about the direction. How far away do you think we are from realizing sort of crypto becoming sort of overtaking cash, I guess, and becoming more sort of the standard, and also reaching those international payments and having that free international? I mean, when do Western Union need to start worrying?
Hopefully they already are. A horrible company. An absolutely horrible company. All of those remittance companies are. Hopefully they really are stressing. I think there's two parts of that question. Will Bitcoin replace cash, or will sort of decentralized cryptocurrencies replace government currencies? I don't imagine. I mean, we're already seeing Bitcoin accepted as legal tender in some places now. Will it replace all cash all around the world? No, probably not. At least not in the immediate future. I think what we will see is sort of the concept of this national digital currency, where maybe they use blockchain technology or not. And then I think what we will see is just much more mainstream crypto use, where just practically, because of how crypto works, because you can send crypto transactions quickly and almost for free if you're using certain cryptocurrencies. So I think it won't be so long where, for example, if you go into your WhatsApp now, you can send photos, you can send videos, you can send voice messages, you can send links, you can send written messages. I think it won't be that long before we're going into our social media or our messaging apps and we'll be able to send money. And what we're already seeing now is these sort of naming services where, if I want to send you crypto, I don't need your Bitcoin address, where I could have you saved in my phone as whatever. And I could have you saved in my phone and you're in my contact address. So, and just as I could send you a message, just as I could send you a photo, I could send you crypto to the name I've got you saved in my contact book. And that's already happening now. So I think in terms of mainstream crypto payments, be that being able to send crypto between friends or to freelancers or in the gig economy or for payments like that, I think the user experience of crypto is changing so fast, and there's so much focus on that now. That's an incredible transformation. So I do think soon, within the next few years, certainly, we'll be able to make these payments in crypto without having to go onto a crypto exchange or without needing to buy crypto or do any of the complicated things that you have to now. And I think it will be basically like sending money. I'll be able to send you, I don't know, 50p or whatever that is. And you won't need to know how it works. You won't need to know that it's crypto. You won't need to know that it's using blockchain. It's just the equivalent of, it's just the easiest way to send you whatever that is, 50p or a pound or whatever quantity you want to send digitally between two people.
And what's your thoughts on the application outside of just currency? So, obviously there's been an awful lot of talk about NFTs become very popular in the last 6 months as well. Do you think that other applications like that, there's been talk about that replacing traditional copyright, those sort of things? Do you think there's more applications like that we can expect in the coming months and years?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the concept of NFTs isn't brand new. It's more sort of the name is. But yeah, absolutely. I think we'll be seeing more of that. And they became popular with digital art. But you've really got so many industries where there's a use for having a digital version of something. So, for example, diamonds. If you buy a diamond currently, you have no way of knowing really where it came from. Was it sustainably mined? If you want to sell me a diamond, okay, maybe you've got the certificate, but how do I really know it's the same diamond that links to the certificate? Whereas with you can have now this concept where you've basically got NFTs of diamonds, where you've got sort of a digital skeleton of that diamond and the digital certificate of that diamond. So you can prove that this is the same diamond and this is where it was mined and it was mined sustainably, and you bought it from so-and-so and you sold it to me for so-and-so and so forth. So you've got much more proof. And likewise, for example, within the alcohol and there's now NFTs of whiskey and fine wines and so forth, because you've got, I think the statistic is that 10% of all alcohol is faked, is not what you think it is.
Really?
And yeah, there's been some incredible stories and documentaries, but the fine wine industry, the fine alcohol industries, there's all sorts of fraud in that. And
so we're talking like the sort of top ends of the booze that you never drink.
Well, the top ends of booze that you maybe never drink, that it's seen in investment. But then also, I mean, even in the lower ends, there's all these reports that if you buy, I don't know, a cheap wine that says it's such and such a grape, or actually it's a mix of such and such grapes, or it's from whatever. So it's maybe more creative marketing. But there's all these statistics that the food, I think it's about 10% of all food that you buy isn't what you think it is. If you buy white fish, they say it's whatever it is, and actually often it's some other type of strange white fish from Vietnam. There's all these.
It's the horse meat scandal all over again.
Exactly, horse meat, or you think you're buying free range eggs or organic eggs. Well, there's been all these cases where actually they're battery eggs that they just stick an organic label on, and people don't know. So, and 50% I think of chocolate is made by slave labor or has child labor in it, and it's something similar for clothing. There's so many problems in the traditional supply chains and traditional industries, partly because the supply chains are so complicated and partly because the brands are so large that they probably frankly don't care about the conditions of their end workers, and B, because the supply chains are so complicated, they have no ability to really know what's going on. So it involves huge levels of trust. Whereas by putting certain amounts of these data on blockchain, which also involves IoT and other things to actually check that it's all true, and then having NFTs to prove that, NFT basically being sort of digital certificate to show, well, this raw ingredient was bought from this place and includes XYZ, and it was transported at so-and-so and was bought by so-and-so and so forth, to show the sort of the real ingredients or the real origin of the product. I think that will add a lot more transparency and will add to resale values and so forth. So, I think there's a huge place for that, and that's quite an exciting space at the moment.
Wow. I mean, there's so many applications there that I hadn't even thought of. And I don't think I'd realized quite how many. Are these scams all in the book as well? Or are these just other scams that you know about?
No. I mean, there's a few documentaries about the sort of the alcohol and the food ones. So no, we don't go into the
I think you're getting better
scandals.
I think you're getting the documentary recommendations on Netflix than I am.
So no, it doesn't go on to those, and that's totally going off the subject of crypto. And there's other crypto scams, and there's other scams still happening today.
Well, I mean, it's been amazing talking to you, and I'm conscious I'm taking up a lot of your time. So in terms of wrapping this up, where can people get the book? How can people get involved in the Curry Club, and anything else that you want to talk about?
Well, no, thank you so much for having me on. So the Curry Club, it's cryptocurryclub.com. So there's a newsletter, there's an industry publication, all totally free to subscribe to. You've got virtual events one day, hopefully soon. Maybe we'll have in-person events again, but we'll see. Subject to Corona. And the book, it's CryptoWars, Fake Deaths, Missing Billions and Industry Disruption. So that's available. It's available from the publisher, koganpage.com, with a discount code CryptoWars20. It's available from all good bookshops, from Waterstones, W.H. Smith, Foyles, Blackwell's, Amazon, and wherever you buy your books from.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.